Good morning, Doug.
Good morning.
Now, I want to get to the substance of this meeting a little later, but first I must ask, skeptics argue that, this whole summit is about little more than the two leaders with outsized, opinions of themselves, egos, if you will. Is this really just a personality contest?
There's a giant factor of personality contest. These are two leaders with outsized egos. In the case of Donald Trump, a president who craves attention, he craves ratings, he craves being in the spotlight. The word narcissist has not been used enough to describe him. And he wants a historic coup, so to speak. He wants to go down in history as a man who made peace in North Korea. You could say, well, what's wrong with that? He's really doing it for himself. He has talked, to no end about believing he's the one who deserves a Nobel Prize before anything's really been done here. Kim Jong-un, what can you say about him? He is, one of the world's worst, most brutal dictator who's impoverished his country, driven it into an economic isolation from the rest of the world, and has basically held his country captive to his ambitions to build a nuclear arsenal, unmatched by anyone else. These men, this has been sort of compared to a cage fight in many ways, like one of those wrestling shows, those extreme wrestling matches where you have these two men, attention-craving men in the spotlight, knowing that they're going to get all the attention, having the world's attention riveted on them. I'll note that today in Washington, it's perhaps no minor detail that Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen's going to be testifying on Capitol Hill.
Something he'll be paying attention to, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael Cohen's going to be testifying on a day where he's expected basically to say that there's a con man, a crook, and a cheat in the White House.
And a racist.
And a racist also. And that's probably going to overshadow quite a bit of what's going on in Vietnam. The only saving grace for Donald Trump in terms of getting the camera time and the attention is that there's a big time difference between Hanoi and Washington. But yes, there is no element of showmanship, of reality TV, of ratings, of getting the attention, of having the spotlight on these two men in this whole event as we talk about it.
Now, Doug, last year, the meeting in Singapore was all about breaking the ice, if you will. What is this meeting in Hanoi hoping to achieve? Because last time around, we didn't really get any tangible results.
Absolutely, very few tangible results. And what you could really say is it's one big backtrack. The White House has been hard at work trying to lower expectations, accusing reporters, the press basically, of building up expectations in order to be able to bash Trump afterwards for not delivering. But listen, Trump made his bed, proverbially, and he's sleeping in it now. What do I mean when I say that? After the last summit, let me get to this in a second. After the last summit, Donald Trump, you remember he made those declarations, there is no more nuclear threat in the world. You can all sleep safely tonight. He's had to backtrack from that in a major way. And like I said before, the emphasis is now off this so-called denuclearization, making North Korea get rid of its nuclear weapons, because the U.S.'s Donald Trump is suddenly awakening to the realization not so easy to get North Korea to abandon nuclear weapons. And it's shifting the emphasis now to eking out perhaps a peace declaration or whatever, trying to save face in a sense, although the White House will call anything a victory here. Builds on the personal relationship. I've talked about it. Donald Trump and Kim have exchanged what the White House has said. Donald Trump's, they're almost love letters. Donald Trump says he writes great gushing letters to me. They're great letters. He's shown, Donald Trump, he's shown Kim's letters to the Japanese Prime Minister. So there's this real sense of flattery that Kim Jong-un has learned how to play Donald Trump. He's learned that cardinal rule. You flatter Donald Trump, you get his attention, you get him on your side. Denuclearization, I don't know how many times I've mispronounced this word. What does it mean?
Tough to say.
Remember, they couldn't agree on it last time. They had no idea. For the U.S., it meant get rid of all your nuclear weapons. For North Korea, it meant anything but. It meant get the U.S. troops out of South Korea, denuclearize the entire Korean peninsula, then perhaps we'll start dismantling. So will they be able to get any closer to definition on that? How much of that will be a concession by the U.S.? Talk more about talks. Lay a timetable for more talks about eventual, over a longer period, nuclear disarmament, dismantlement in North Korea, because it's not happening tomorrow, and a peace declaration. We talk about that formal declaration at the end of the Korean War. We're unlikely to get that at this summit, but maybe some sort of declaration, face-saving declaration that makes it look like they can take away something from the summit.
Doug, I don't know if you've been checking Twitter today. Donald Trump has tweeted, saying how great Vietnam is,
yes,
promising, if you will, that it could serve as a model to Kim Jong-un if he denuclearized.
Yeah, I'm going to compress sort of two questions into one here. It could, but will it? Let's bring up this Vietnam model here. Vietnam, former arch-U.S. foe, then ended up becoming almost friends with the U.S. in an economic opening. Vietnam is a model how for North Korea? Well, first of all, it's in the neighborhood. They're both communist-controlled countries, one-party state monopoly rule, right? One party in town, one game in town. So that's where they have things in common. Vietnam has a booming economy, and yet it's kept that tight political control with very brutal crackdowns on dissent. It reins in any dissenters, any opponents. That's something we don't see any dissent in North Korea. And it's had this gradual reform process, gradual opening up to the rest of the world. And today, Vietnam's one of the region's fastest growing economies. It's a real boom country. The thing is Kim Jong-un really about to, in the name of opening up to the world, give up his monopoly control over his country, his model of development? Is he really ready to bring North Korea out of its isolation and emulate Vietnam to the extent Vietnam has sort of become a showcase? I don't think so. I think North Korea, despite all the talk of the rapprochement and the similarity in their models, I think that they're pretty separate when it comes down to the personalities of their leader. Vietnam has communist control. It's never been run by a dictatorial dynasty of rulers, as has North Korea.
We'll see if Donald Trump can convince him. Thank you very much for that, Douglas Herbert there with Global Grid. It's time for Focus next, and today we bring you a report from Japan, a country where around 700,000 Koreans live. They are the descendants of people who came in by force to work during Japan's colonial rule. After the Second World War ended, many were repatriated, including those who started a new life in communist North Korea. The regime in Pyongyang has maintained close ties with ethnic North Koreans who live in Japan, despite decades of friction between the two governments. Some even support Kim Jong-un, but one group of North Korean residents has rebelled and taken the unprecedented step of filing a lawsuit demanding that North Korea allow repatriated people to return to Japan. France 24's correspondents on the ground filed this report.
This nondescript building in the heart of Tokyo is the headquarters of Chongryon, or the General Association of Korean Residents in Japan. In the absence of diplomatic ties between Tokyo and Pyongyang, it acts as the de facto North Korean embassy in Japan, and it's the target of regular protests by Japanese nationalists. From espionage to the abduction of Japanese citizens, the activists accused Chongryon of helping North Korea commit crimes on Japanese territory. For decades, Chongryon actively supported the regime in Pyongyang, peddling propaganda that painted a positive picture of the country and prompted tens of thousands of Japan-born North Koreans to go and live in their spiritual homeland.